Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
I really missed that opening theme.
I know. We're not even talking about the nanny today, so it's a little misleading.
Exactly. I mean, I was going to do the normal hello, welcome, but look, it's still Mr. Sheffield podcast, but we're obviously out of nanny episodes. The last time you heard from us, we watched The Beautician and the Beast. As promised, we said we would eventually circle back to one of the other Fran Drescher shows, and so we're here to talk about Happily Divorced, which I'm very interested to hear your opinions on. But
Yes.
First, hi, Toria.
Hello, Shawn. Really quick though, before we get into pleasantries, I think we should make it clear that we're not watching the entire series of Happily Divorced. We just wanted to watch the pilot, kind of say hello to everybody. And we're still, I know it sounds like we're never going to do this, but we're still figuring out exactly what our next show will be. But we just don't like to go too long without saying hi and watching some Fran.
Agreed. And just for some real nerdy inside baseball, if you notice, these episodes are titled Season 7. And this is episode 2 of Season 7. And in my headcanon, I guess, Season 7 is us just trying different things and playing around so that we can record and say hi to the audience. But there's no real... We haven't quite found our theme yet. But yeah, we didn't want to leave. We like doing this. We just have to figure out what we're going to do. And I think by the time we get to the end of this discussion, it'll be a little clearer why we're not just diving right into Happily Divorced series right away.
Yeah. And then also, if you guys missed us like we missed you, you could stick around at the end. And then Shawn and I are just going to gab a little because we haven't caught up in a minute. And so we'll just extend the pleasure.
It really makes it seem like we only talk when we do this podcast. We hate each other as soon as the mics shut off.
Hey, guess what? We're unhappily divorced from podcasting together.
I was trying to, the whole time I was watching this, I was like, there's a play on this, right? Where like Tori and I are also unhappily divorced or happily divorced.
I know. Happily divorced from our last show.
Yeah.
But much like Fran and Peter, we will have another project to work on again.
Absolutely. We can't quit each other, just like Fran and Peter.
Which we'll get into.
Happily Divorced pilot. We're back, baby. And I gotta say, anything that starts with John Michael Higgins kind of rules.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So premise of this show, for anybody who doesn't know, firstly, it premiered on TV Land in 2011. And the premise is a woman named Fran is married to a man named Peter. He comes out as gay in the pilot episode. And the whole rest of the series, which lasted for 2 seasons, is dealing with like how these two people cope with that and how their continued love for each other, even if they're not romantically involved, proves like fortifying and challenging and funny and all of these things. And to put it into timeline context, The Nanny ended in 1999. And as I said, this premiered in 2011. And when The Nanny ended, the real life Fran Drescher and Peter Marc Jacobson, her husband and Nanny co-creator, they were still married. But if, like me, you have read Cancer Schmancer, which is one of Fran's memoirs, or have dug into this, there was a lot of issues in the marriage by that point. They were really just staying together for their baby, which was the nanny, and all of the livelihoods that depended on that show. And so I think that, if the finale ended in June 1999, they were divorced by like December of that year. And as Fran says in her memoir, they really didn't speak for a couple of years. They didn't have much contact, and Peter then in real life came out as gay 2 years after the divorce. And I think it was at around that juncture.
That's actually a question I wanted to clarify. I knew you would know the answer. So they did not get divorced because he was gay.
Exactly. Yeah.
They had other marital issues, in other words, and then it was that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
okay.
Yeah. But if you listen to some interviews with them years later or in Fran's memoir, while it wasn't like directly because of that, I think as they grew and discussed and kind of evolved over the ensuing years, they realized, obviously a lot of the issues that we're presenting, like, were really at the core. That was at the core.
Got it.
Because Fran will say like, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but again, just because this was in her memoir, I feel like I'm not speaking out of turn. Her version or narrative is that, he had become very controlling and she was becoming very suffocated. And later they realized, well, yeah, he was feeling so out of control that he was trying to control external things very tightly. And so, but, again, this is my memory of a memoir I read 3 years ago, but I do love a celebrity memoir, and I do feel like that's accurate from my memory.
Well, I mean, it answers a lot of my initial questions because I actually think, like, structurally, right, this pilot does a good job of, like, by the end of the cold open, you know what the show is, right? Hey, Fran, he wakes up, he's like, Fran, I think I'm, basically he's like, I think I'm gay, or I'm gay. And she's like, what? And then you get like the opening credits. So I think like structurally, like that works for me. But my first question was, are we now in an autobiography? Where does fact and fiction blur? So I like kind of that it's not the same because at least from my perspective now, I feel like I can separate it better. I'm not filtering everything through, did this happen or some version of this happen. I'm now able to at least go like, oh, okay, so their life wasn't this exactly, but this is like when you distill what happened to them and you go, how do we make that into a sitcom? The husband has to live with her. And like all of this suddenly becomes like, oh, that's a perfect, like on paper at conception, this is a really, really good idea, right? I think that the subject matter is also incredibly fascinating. I think like if we're talking big picture, I think the biggest thing that worked against this show is when it was made, what network it was made for, and like pinholing it as a sitcom, right? As like a 3-camera studio audience sitcom, I think actually kind of hurts how deep you can explore the actual issue and like what's interesting about it. And you undercut a lot of things a lot of times, like by having to constantly make jokes, if that.
Yeah. And I mean, my thought, and I guess just to establish before we get into like what actually happens in this episode. So yes, like Peter comes out as gay within like the first scene, which, so as you said, it's like inspired by Fran and Peter in real life, but not like actually based on beat for beat, but it's sort of like this could have been a movie, like this plot and this concept could have been a really fascinating movie. And actually, I saw online that Fran and Peter were working on a movie based on their experience when TV Land basically called, asked if they had any ideas bouncing around. And when Fran mentioned this, they were like, yes, let's do it. So like, of course, like if a network wants to greenlight something, you're going to say yes, just based on the nature of this industry. So it makes sense that they went the TV route. But I was like, oh man, I would have loved the angles of this they get to be explored in a film. And honestly, maybe like more of an R-rated thing, where you get to like dig into.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of, I mean, like, yes, if you're working on a semi-dramedy movie that really explores this issue deeply, and then a network says, do you want a sitcom? You go, oh, all right, well, let's just pivot. I get it. Yeah. I don't think you're dumb for that. Like, you need money, you need to work, you want to stay relevant. Like, that makes sense to me. But yeah, it feels like a missed opportunity from a creative standpoint or
yeah.
I think that, they did all of the things right? Like they do set up, okay, obviously the show is not going to be about hoping these two crazy kids get together. But what it is going to be about, if we do it right, is how is this man going to go through the motions of, I now realize at this age that I am gay, and I've always been gay. How am I going to make a life for myself? How am I going to get out from my wife's house and like get on my feet? And for her, right, similar journey, like, what do I do now? What does this mean for everything that came before? But also, how do I like move on while this man is still living in my house and making everything awkward? So like, I do think there was a story engine at play that could have worked. But I think, and now I think is actually a good time to shift into, let's go through the beats of this pilot, because I think in that we will be able to identify the areas where maybe it didn't grip us in the way that we just pitched, right?
And so, okay. So we start off with Fran, who is playing a woman named Fran, and Peter Levitt, the great John Michael Higgins, who is in your beloved what's that late night movie?
What's that late night movie? You mean Late Night?
Is it called Late Night?
Yeah, Late Night. The one about Jay Leno and David Letterman.
Yeah. That's like when in the
Late Night.
That's like in The Simpsons. One time Homer goes, "What was that movie called about the bus that speeds, and if it doesn't speed above a certain speed and keep the speed of the bus?"
Oh, Late Shift. Sorry, it's called The Late Shift.
Oh, The Late Shift. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Where Homer's like, "What was that movie called?" And then he goes, "Oh yeah, it was called The Bus That Couldn't Stop." But in this case, Peter Levitt played Letterman really, really well in that. He's totally immersed himself in that role.
Yeah, John Michael Higgins crushes as Letterman, so much so that he makes the other guy kind of goofy as
yes, I blame the other guy too.
He comes off very goofy.
That'll be on our next podcast.
We'll watch the Late Shift from 1996.
We'll do it in the middle of the dead of the night. Okay, but anyway, they are asleep in bed, and Peter wakes up and he's like having heart palpitations, and it's funny because Fran has clearly heard this from him before. Like, he's definitely like an anxious guy, and she's like, well, that's what happens when you watch Grey's Anatomy before bed. And we then establish that he's a real estate agent, because she's like, oh, maybe it's because you haven't sold a house in a couple months, but it's okay. The market's not great right now. And then he looks at her super seriously and he's just like, "Fran, you know how much I love you, right?" And she's like, "Are you having an affair? Who is she?" And he's like, no. There's no woman in my life. And while this whole thing is happening, you can tell like something's kind of eating at him. And she's just like, "Well, okay." And she turns off the lights again. And then in the dark, he just goes, "It's just, I think I'm gay." And she turns the lights on, and she was so good in this scene. She was like,
both of them.
Yeah. But she's just like, "What?" And she's like, and he starts to try to explain, and she goes, No. Everybody stop talking." It's just the two of them. And then he's like, I've been feeling this way for a long time, and I've been trying to suppress it. And she's like, "But we just had sex during Leno. How gay can you be?" Which, hey, nice little dovetail to the beginning of our conversation.
Nice little wink.
So I don't think they meant it as that, but now
Probably
I'm like,
and
that was like, that's the cold open. So we instantly establish that is the tension in this episode, and this world.
And then we get a new theme song, and like, look, I get it. There's a nostalgia factor at play, but like, it ain't no nanny theme song. It's fine. It's good. And it sings about what the show's going to be about and all that. But like, it was missing that nanny charm for me. And it's hard to, is that just because I like the nanny better, or I don't really, it didn't have the catchiness. It didn't, I missed the,
well, it's like
style.
It's tough because the nanny theme song is like arguably top 5 ever. Like, some could even say top 3. Like, it's literally
solid.
In those like roundups of like the best, TV themes ever. So I did try to be like, well, what if I had never what if I separate this from the nanny? And I'd be like, oh, like it's cute. It's fine. It's not like super memorable. It's is animated, but it's like little stick figures. And it's just, basically explains the premise of the show super succinctly. And there's like even a line where it's like, she always thought their like connection was forced. And it's like, she got married anyway, but turns out that he was gay. Now she's happily divorced.
Yeah. I mean, they do it, right? It's how she became the net. I mean, they like do the thing. It just, I think that's a good point though, right? If I remove the nanny, where does this sit in the pantheon of like sitcom show theme songs? And it doesn't breach my top 10, that's for sure. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Growing Pains, Charles in Charge. I mean, I can name so many that have, Who's the Boss, Different Strokes. I mean, I could definitely get to 10 before I got Friends.
It's really funny too, because when you said Charles in Charge as your second pick, my brain almost had a conversation with itself where I went, Charles in Charge, like what the hell is that theme song? And then as if it came from somebody else, Charles in Charge with days.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I do know it.
Yeah, that was little childhood Toria deep inside your broken brain going, I remember things.
Yeah, no, it's like somebody answered that didn't feel like it was coming from me because I genuinely did not think I knew it. But yeah, Friends was so catchy.
Yeah. So I mean, okay, I don't think we have to give a too deep of a blow by blow, but I do want to make sure we hit like some of the best lines and stuff. So like this next scene is like this. The overall setup is like you're in their kitchen and like they're figuring it out. Like they're hashing this all out now, basically.
Yes. When we cut back from the cold open, we've caught up with them literally like 2 minutes later. They've gone into the other part of their house and she's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she's literally like, I always thought it was strange that you wanted a cassis sorbet intermezzo at our wedding. And he's like, why? It matched the roses and was a lovely palate cleanser. And she's like, oh my God, that was so gay.
She also at one point is like, he's like, look, this is like, I know I'm gay, whatever. And she's like, you've never even been with a man. Trust me, it's not that great. Which just got a real laugh out of me. I thought that was really, really, really funny.
And I also, there's I think a really heartfelt part of this scene where he says, look, Fran, I never faked loving you. Like I still love you. And I love our life together, which is why it's taken me so long to face this about myself, which I think is like the crux of what he's going through,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's, I mean, again, that to me was like, oh, this is like, I was hooked at this point still. I was like, this is cool. I'm interested in like this guy's journey, like especially knowing who this show is created by and that it is semi-autobiographical, at least from the I realized later in life that I'm gay standpoint. That's interesting, So I was still in here, I think.
Yes. And I think, we'll get to this later. I was hoping there would be more of that type of exploration, even if done comedically in this episode. And the fact that there wasn't left me like with some questions, feeling a little unsatisfied. Obviously, we haven't watched other episodes. Maybe they get into it, but they ended up kind of focusing on the stuff that I thought was almost like the dressing on top of the real stuff that would have been more satisfying. But then there was this funny line when at the end of this scene, he goes, well, I guess we're going to have to think about what we tell people or how we're going to tell people about this. And she goes, oh my God, my mother will be devastated. And then we do an instant quick cut to her in her parents' kitchen and she's like crying. And her mom, who's played by Rita Moreno, by the way, she just goes, we always thought he was gay. Literally, and like turns the paper of her magazine.
Great. It's a great cut. And the dad going like, we thought you knew. Like, and she's like, why would I marry a gay man? And then they both shrug like, dude, we don't know what you do. It's great. It's like a great setup. So things I really appreciated about this it's a really, really funny. It surprised me. It made me laugh. Also, I liked that they didn't make these parents Fran finds parents. that we're getting different parents here, which I was nervous about when she said parents and we cut. I was like, oh, is this good? And like, look, it looks like their kitchen, but the parents are characterized differently, which I really appreciated. And the scene was funny. And I think this is going to get into, and then as we start to describe the rest of the episode, what I think ultimately the issue is that like it starts to fall into very familiar sitcom nanny style plot points and beats. And to your point, instead of further exploring some of that stuff that we were like, ooh, that's the juicy stuff, we basically transition to, and I'm gonna skip a little bit, but it's like we basically transition to, this all builds up to Fran going on her first date with a guy, which felt rushed to me here, right? That felt like that's almost the emotional, like you pay that off over a couple of episodes, is like figuring out, like for her to immediately shift to like, I'm gonna go out on a date with this guy. And it felt more like, oh, we can have a Fran in a restaurant doing funny shtick scenario.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Well, and also just to catch people up who haven't seen this or haven't seen it in a long time, they do say 6 months later in this episode, because after she, tells her parents and they're like, yeah, duh, whatever. Do you guys want to come to the, this show with us tomorrow? Oh, 1 second. I'm getting a phone call.
Perfect.
Here.
Classic.
Sad horn me. It's disrespectful, Shawn. So disrespectful. God, Shawn, did you even thank me?
For what?
No, I was just thinking of how old Mr. J.D. Vance was calling things disrespectful and then demanded a thank you. So, all right, guys, we won't get political, but we will always dunk on J.D. Vance when given the opportunity.
We love him, don't we, folks?
Yeah. God, I just hope those two crazy kids can make it work. Okay, so then though.
So we get a 6 month jump.
Yes, and we did cut. This was a really good line too, though, when she does come out to her parents, and then she's like, and then the mom's literally like reading a magazine, and she's like, "So do you and Peter want to come to West Side Story with us? We got tickets." And she's like, "Mom, my husband's gay. We're getting a divorce." And Rita Moreno just goes, "Sweetheart, don't throw away a good marriage over nothing." which honestly, I think the women in my family might give that advice if I'd been married for 20 years and to a good guy.
Absolutely. And this is why ultimately, to me, the 6 month jump kind of misses the part that was the most interesting to me. Like I needed to see that 6 months and all the messiness and the emotions that they're going through for the whole first season, love these characters. And then the release of like, they're finally figuring it out. She's going to go on her first date. She's ready to, like, that felt like what I thought we were going to get. And then we just jump to, now they're wacky kids living together and she's going on dates and she's pretending like he's not living there. And it got to, I don't know, it just felt like, They jumped a bunch of interesting stuff to get to a sitcom, So
I had the same note. I had it at the end, but yeah, my note almost identical was that like I understand that it was tricky how to approach this because the title of the show is called Happily Divorced. You really have to set this concept up and like get them divorced within that first episode. But I wrote, it would have been interesting to have conversations like, okay, so like, when did you first know? Delving more into Peter's actual experience, maybe some more honest and real conversations about how heartbreaking this news would be for Fran, realistically. And like, how she's committed to learning to love this like new, more authentic version of Peter instead of the big like we'll get into it, but the big resolution, quote unquote, of this episode was literally something very minor, and it had like nothing to do with this particular giant life event, which is your husband coming out after 18 years and you realizing, you have to come out after 18 years. Yes. But so when we keep talking about this date, I'll just say that, one thing I think we should say, again, if someone's never seen this, the reason they're living together is they realize that they actually owe more on their house than it's worth. So like the idea of splitting everything 50-50 and both walking away with some money is kind of pointless. And at one point, Peter tells Fran this and she's like, what are you talking about? But I listened to literally everything. No, she goes, I did everything Susie Orman told me to. And then Susie Orman, for anyone who doesn't know, like our younger listeners, a financial, is she a planner, a financial coach?
Like a coach, like a life coach, but talking about like finances and how to like have like the perfect life or whatever.
Yeah. And she like has she's very aggressive with her advice, and she had a show, maybe still has a show, I'm not sure, where she would just talk about financial topics and kind of like yell at people through the screen. But anyway, so when Fran says that, like, oh, but I did exactly what Susie Orman told me to, Peter's like, well, I'm pretty sure she didn't tell you to borrow against the house during a recession so that you could start a flower business in the garage. So we also established that she's a florist, by the way. So he's a real estate agent and she's a florist, just to get the basics out there. But so then she gets asked out on a date, and then she goes on the date with this handsome guy named Elliot. And as you were alluding to, in classic, like the Nanny Lucille Ball-esque, comedy, she ends up kind of pressuring this guy to try an appetizer that he's on the fence about. Mm-hmm. And then it turns out there are truffles in it, and like the mushroom, and he's deathly allergic to truffles. So his throat starts to close up at the table, and she's like, oh my God. And she's like, okay, I know, I've got it. It's antihistamines in here. And she's like pulling them out of her purse. And there's like, everything in her purse, from like scissors to scarves to like Metamucil and all this stuff. And as she like is struggling to find it, he just keels over. And I was honestly like, is it?
She crushes in this. Well, I thought he was dead too, but she crushes in this. Like, look, this show didn't do it for me, right? I don't think that's like a shock, but like, I don't think that should discount like Fran and Peter are like incredibly talented writers. They write sitcoms really, really well. Like they get laughs out of me in a way that this style sitcom usually doesn't. And like she's Fran, right? You give her the phone book to read and she's going to find a way to make it funny. So like all of those elements still worked for me. I think I just felt like and look, I would not be at all. They're doing it on TV Land, right? The home of classic sitcoms. So like, obviously this had to be a certain type of show, right? But it, the title Happily Divorced didn't necessarily have to mean right now while you're watching it. It also could have meant like the goal of this show, this couple's goal is to eventually figure out a way to be happily divorced because they love each other so much, but also they can't stay married. Like they just can't, right? Because what you get here, right, with to Toria's point, is like the wrap up becomes about she went on a date, she gave a guy truffles, like she's got to like patch things over with this guy, but it's not about the husband and wife necessarily.
And I would say though there was an element of reconciliation between Fran and Peter, but it wasn't like I think what I was like feeling like I needed or craved after what we saw before, because there was this. When she says she's going on a date, it happens to be the night that she and Peter were going to go see the Sound of Music sing-along at the Hollywood Bowl, which they clearly do like every year. And she had totally forgotten she scheduled this date. So it was kind of this like double blow to him where it's like, oh yeah, not only will you not come with me to do the thing that we always do together, but you're going out with another man. Mm-hmm. And he clearly has feelings about it. Like, it's not like he's yelling. It's not like he's like, how dare you? But he's clearly like, at one point she's like, you can't be gay and jealous. And he's like, why not? I can multitask.
It's great. It's great.
And she ends up, she's like, sorry, like go yourself, and leaves. And so then the next day after this disastrous date, their little moment is he just sits down. He's like, hey, like, I'm sorry I overreacted last night. And in my head, I was like, did you though? Like,
Right.
You hardly did anything. Right. And she was like, oh, it's okay. Like, maybe we can double sometime. And like, that's their little resolution.
I think what we're both sort of envisioning and saying is like the resolution should have been hinged more again on the like, look, we love each other. This completely blew up our lives, but like, we're going to get through this together, and somehow like we will be the only couple in existence that is happily divorced. Like, we're going to coexist. And I think you didn't have to force her on a date for that. I think it had to be more live in that first 24, 48 hours where she's processing it. And like, maybe you lean more into her being like, going through the 7 stages of grief in the pilot episode, in like that sitcom-y comic way where like, and the dichotomy of her feeling it like 7 stages of grief, but him going through a completely different processing, right? That's where you get your two-hander. We're watching both of these people go through this. And then the resolution at the end is they both help each other process this just a little bit to get them that, okay, we're going to have to get through this together. Like, we can't blow it all up and never speak again. That's not going to work here. Like, we're both going to have to work through this. It's going to be step by step, and we'll get through it. Maybe the big plot point is the whole, I want you to move out, I can't move out of it all. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, one scene that worked really well in this pilot because it kind of made us see their connection. It was like the one scene where we like really were like, oh, this is why these two people like can't live together, but also can't live apart, is the morning after her date. She wakes up and she goes in the living room and she sees him there and she's like, oh my God, like it was such a disaster. Like, I almost killed my date. We spent the whole night in the ER. And she's like, and the worst part is I think it was my fault. Like, I kind of forced him to eat this appetizer and he's allergic. And then he just goes, well, did he tell you he was allergic? Did he tell the waiter he was allergic? Did he have a bracelet on his wrist? And he's like, if I was going to be just, eating something that someone put in front of me, I would have some questions. And she's like, you'd investigate. He goes, I would. Yep. And then she goes, you're right. He's a dope. And they're like, yep, he has no case. And then they both sort of sit there satisfied. It was like very Seinfeld.
Turn on the guy. It's really good.
Yes. It was very like Seinfeldian. And you're like, oh yeah, these two people have a rhythm, a familiarity. They like clearly have very similar like kind of perspectives and probably like to like, in a fun way, like shit talk other people, like, in not all the time, but like, when you're like, oh yeah, that person's super obnoxious because of XYZ. And you're talking to someone who's very on the same page as you. And it's just like, it works, not in a bad way. It's like, it's nice. I think that might have been my favorite moment between the two of them in the whole series. And I think, to your point, like maybe it could have been the kind of thing where like for most of the episode, Fran is just going through the stages of grief. She's furious and he's maybe like, not sure what to do or blah, blah, blah. And then maybe they meet up for coffee at the end and they fall into this they fall into their chemistry. They're magnets to each other because they really are, really great together in a lot of ways, just not one big way. And then maybe it's sort of like, all right, like, well, why don't we go to that movie?
Well, you could have had her spiral from learning this information impact her flower business in some way. And like some vendor or something, you still get your setup of some guy that is not that involved with them directly, but is involved with her. Something happens. They still have that moment where she comes to him like, oh my God, oh my God. He still gets that moment. The husband still gets the moment of like, let's turn this around. And like the person who wronged you is actually the jerk. We see that between them. And then she gets her resolution to her, to this exterior problem. But in the process is like, man, I do really love this man. And he clearly still loves me. So like, throwing him out and being angry at him is not is not going to help me. Like we need, right. And then that gives you the same sort of, resolution.
Yeah. And well, the way that this episode like actually ends is so after, this terrible date, she and Peter are rehashing the next morning and the guy shows up and he brings chocolates and he kind of tries to apologize. And, her parents end up coming over and, they all kind of meet this new guy and we sort of just get this feeling that like, oh, I think things are going to be okay. Like everyone's kind of accepted here. And the new guy seems to be cool with Peter being there and Peter is getting comfortable with this new guy. And then the button of the episode is Fran and Elliot are like on the couch making out. It's evening and he stops and he's like, I just feels kind of weird that like your ex-husband is like literally in the next room right now. And she's like, he's fine. But then Peter ends up like tiptoeing out looking for his neck pillow and it like totally ruins the vibe. And then he and Fran just start like bickering at each other like an old married couple. And Elliot literally just turns on the TV and starts watching while they're fighting behind him, which is like, it's very cute and it's very quaint. But for us to already be here, like, yeah, I was like, oh, we didn't go through those motions we talked about. But I also think it's a very tough thing to do because I can see a studio exec or somebody being like, well,
yes,
we gotta lay out what this show is in that pilot. And that is they're going to be divorced and they're going to be living together.
And there's going to be problems every week in that situation. Totally. Listen, as usual, like it's nice that we have like a great relationship with Peter. He's been so kind to us and shares all sorts of like, inside things to like understand what was going on. And like, absolutely, like my number one question with this is like, what was yours? What did you guys bring? Like, why were these choices made? How much was this dictated by the format of the series versus what was agreed on in a room with executives as far as like what to make this show. And yeah, I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right that it was a matter of, hey, we got to land on like, what's the show going to be every week? And that's why I'll go back to my initial comment, which is like a different time, a different place. This show would have developed maybe into something that didn't have to be so rigidly sitcom-y and could have spent more time exploring, the bridge of all of this, without having it to like immediately be like, okay, look, every week you're going to tune in. He's living there. She doesn't really want him to be. She's trying to date. He's trying to date. Mm-hmm. What wacky thing is going to happen? Like,
yeah. And to that point, I think that their pitch, like their elevator pitch to the network was like, oh yeah, it should be about like my relationship with my gay ex-husband and us navigating our relationship as I have a new guy. And yes. So if that's like your pitch, you kind of got to get there pretty fast.
Yes.
But totally. It's like, but you're right. Like, it's more like the time and the format. And maybe we're kind of like, we are mad that it's just something that it's not,
totally.
As opposed to
totally. Yeah. Look, it got 2 seasons. People liked it. It just like, for me, it didn't hit. And I'm sure a lot of that comes down to personal preference and probably what I thought it was going to be as they laid out the story to me, I mean, look, as with The Nanny, I will always give them credit for, they write about gay characters. They talk about topics that people probably weren't talking about, even in whatever, 2000, what is this, 2003 or whatever? 2011. It's like we were still not seeing sitcoms that like maybe Will and Grace, So like it's like it is an interesting scenario to explore. There's like, my TV curiosity is like, I'd want to watch like a couple more to see what happens. And most shows don't find their footing till most sitcoms especially do not find their footing until season 2 when like the rhythms really start to kick in. But yeah, I think ultimately for me, it's a failure of executing concept to my taste,
Yeah. And I was thinking about this, and it sucks to always be comparing it to The Nanny because again, The Nanny is like one of like the top sitcoms of all time, one of the most successful.
Yeah.
Like, it's like
Lightning in a
literally
bottle.
been remade in like a million languages. So it's kind of unfair to always be comparing new projects to that one. But like when you look at that pilot, like not only is there Fran, who's like an iconic character, but there's like a cornucopia of like iconic characters in one household. It's like, Niles, Cece. Remember little Brighton stumbling in, pretending he got stabbed in the pilot. You got this like handsome, debonair Englishman that's like also like a bottle of nerves. And then you've got like the two sisters who each have their distinct things. And you like really, really wanted to see Maggie like
snarky
kind
butler.
Yes. Yeah. But like you wanted to see Maggie grow into her own in that pilot and little, Gracie was adorable and neurotic. And in this one, it's like, we got a couple friends. Like we got Judy, Fran's friend, and we got like Caesar, their employee, both of whom had almost nothing to do. And then the parents, while it was nice that they were portrayed as supportive and there was like the great Rita Moreno, like none of them were, oh my God, Sylvia. Like, and then I don't even know if, oh my God, how am I blanking on Sylvia's mother?
Or not
no.
Yetta.
No. Yetta. Oh my God. That's but like, so I don't think Yetta was in the pilot actually, but either way, like this lacks.
No, but the pilot had Cece, the children, Mr. Sheffield, AKA a love interest, and the butler, right? And the mom, I think. But even without the mom, right? Those core, that to your point, right? That core group gives us all of these different storylines that we start to see in our head and characters that we can be interested in. And because of the focus of this show, you get Fran, you get Peter, you get one friend or person they interact with each outside of that. But those people in this pilot don't come in with like, oh my God, I instantly know who they are. They're a little more grounded. They're more just kind of like, oh yeah, it's someone they know, but I don't really know anything about them at all. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And then maybe I guess Elliot becomes recurring.
He's in at least a few more. I'm not sure, but none of them were these like kind of full-fledged archetypes that we instantly could grab onto, and they didn't have like amazing zingers and Niles like within the first 10 minutes you were like, oh my gosh, he's clearly going to be such a great character to play with. And so it also, I think, there was that element too. And then I'm trying to think, let me see if I have any other notes. Oh, I think that sort of wraps up our discussion of what actually happened.
Do we do segments? Do we do like lines?
It was more like observations, I was thinking, because like, even when I thought about doing a Yiddish, I was like, oh, there isn't Yiddish. And actually my observation is this is a distinctly less Jewish show than The Nanny was. Yeah. That's not the focus of it, which is fine. It was just interesting.
Yeah, that's true. I did like the line when the waiter goes, did something happen to your husband? And Fran says, yes, he turned gay, but I think I just killed my date. Like I loved the confused identity of, is that guy your husband? No, but my husband is gay and that guy is dead. Like, great. So like perfect line. Perfect.
And you already called this one out, but I loved it when she's like, how do you even know you're gay for sure? I mean, you've never even been with a man. Trust me, it's not that great. And it's just so a very funny thing to say to your own husband as you try to convince him he's not gay.
Yes. Like that's a line that I'm going to share with Elizabeth when she gets home tonight, because I think it's really, really funny.
And also at one point, the guy that she's dating, Elliot, he's like, oh, I love her voice. And Peter just goes, give it time. Like it's just which like a cute line between like, your current guy and the guy who's been with you for 20 years. Sure.
Well, and Fran's so friend specific too,
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think, that is our take on this. We did not, on this episode, we didn't discuss it before we started recording. So I genuinely, I think the fact that we kind of came to the same conclusions, if anything, it just means that we have very similar tastes, which we already knew. Yeah. I'd be very interested to hear from our listeners who maybe like watched both seasons, loved it, maybe can be like, oh, well, this part that you were talking about actually totally gets addressed, or like, the later season gets way zanier, sort of in the vein of The Nanny. One thing that I meant to bring up is the wardrobe of it all, because the Nanny, obviously very famous now for Fran Drescher's iconic wardrobe, and she was styled by Brenda Cooper. They brought Brenda back for this show, but obviously Fran is like a decade older and like over 15 years older than she was when she started The Nanny. So Brenda definitely styles her differently. And
the character is so drastic. I mean, this is just a lady who is a florist. She's not like a zany lunatic from Queens who thinks she's a fashionista, but really isn't, but then sort of is because of her style. Like, that's a very specific thing that they don't do with this. And it would have been weird based on how these characters are set up if she was, they're just people. Yes. Like, he's a real estate guy. She sells flowers. Like, they're not fancy schmancy, they have a nice house.
Yes. And there was a little bit of like, I would say like Fran, Brenda pizzazz. Like, when Fran goes on her date, she's wearing a blazer and it's like sparkly silver sequin, but it wasn't like you'd be like, whoa, like, that's a look. But as someone who owns Brenda Cooper's 2002 book, is The Silhouette Solution, using what you have to, hold on, let me click on the whole thing. I forgot. Using what you have to get the look you want. I bought this book when we were deep in our Nanny podcast because Fran Drescher was advertising it on her own feed. Awesome. And she's definitely like you can tell it's like very Brenda Cooper, how she's styling Fran as a woman who's at like this particular stage and phase of life. So I was like, I didn't even know Brenda Cooper for sure was the wardrobe person on this, but I was like, I bet she is. And then
that's awesome.
Lo and behold. And also, as you're right, it makes way more sense for the character, but her makeup is, it's much more subtle. It's much more like, instead of like a bright red, bold look or giant hair, she has just like normal lady hair and like light pink lipstick. And so she definitely is a different character, not just in her experience, but they're showing it too in a way that like, there could have potentially been a world where they're like, no, like it's so Fran to
I think
go crazy.
I also wouldn't be surprised if this was a very, very conscious choice to not be Fran Fine, right? Like she had been that for so long and the whole world saw her as like, she's the annoying voice lady who dresses crazy, right? That like, you know what I mean? Like outside, like you were either fans of her and knew her as Fran Fine, or you were like, oh, that lady, right? Who like has the voice. So like, I think to play a character that's just like a lady, right? Going through a thing is probably also like a bit of a choice of like, hey, I can do other things. And I'm not always, I had a career before this.
Yeah, that's very true.
Very true. I was in a movie, a very famous movie.
Several very famous movies.
Excuse me, Spinal Tap? Okay,
Saturday
so
Night Fever.
do you have anything else from Happily Divorced? Should we let people decide now if they want to listen to us talk for 10 minutes
sure.
about our lives or not?
Yeah, guys, so if you've gotten your fill of Shawn and Toria for the week, then, we bid you adieu and we thank you so much for listening. And we miss this as a collective community. And if you're still thirsty for more, then we apologize in advance that this is just going to be pretty boring because it's going to be like, hey, Shawn.
We'll talk about some cool personal stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the segment song just because I missed playing it. And when it's over, you either will still be here or you'll be like, cool, I'm glad I listened to that. And I can't wait for them to watch another show.
Or you'll be like, what a waste of my life that was.
52 minutes down the drain. I'm going to go hunt them down, demand the minutes back. Okay, I think it's time for the segments theme.
Membership means more with American Express Business Gold. Earn 4 times membership rewards points in your top 2 eligible spending categories every month, including eligible U.S. advertising purchases and select media, and U.S. purchases at restaurants, including takeout and delivery. What are you waiting for? Get the card that flexes with your spending every month. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Mm-hmm.
And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
To say we can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Shawn and Toria.
At least that's not nanny coded. So even if we do not a nanny show, we can take the segments theme with us.
Was that our original one?
No, that's season 3 theme.
Okay. They all have learned after that last season where it was a different one every week. I feel downright confused. Well, I already blew it because the first thing that I wanted to tell you about, I was so excited. I already told you before we started recording, which is I got an espresso machine.
Okay, well,
but I'll tell you, the espresso, not very good, but that milk foamer, it's changed my life. I am so excited every day. I have acid reflux. I've been drinking it too much.
Oh no. I did the same. Well, I was saying I did the same thing with, I bought a coffee machine that has a grinder. So I now grind my own beans like a real jerk.
So good.
And I love it so much, but I drink so much more coffee because I'm like, oh yeah, I can make a delicious fresh cup. And then it's like 5 p.m. and my heart hurts and I can't fall asleep at night.
I've been waking up in the middle of the night with acid reflux and being like, oh my God, I'm like, what if it's something worse? And then I'm in the morning, I've like talked myself down and then I'm like, I'm just going to drink 1 cup today. And then it never
I do think of interest to our listeners, maybe we, just to circle back to like a relevant topic to them, we are circling multiple ideas for like what to do and we just don't know what to do. But I think we've at least settled on like, we have enough time and space now to be able to like start to record. We probably won't record and release week to week because it puts too much pressure on our schedules. So like, we're going to probably go away for a little bit after this. And then we'll come back with like every week you'll get a new episode, but we'll have canned probably the majority of them.
Yeah. As in like, we'll have them in the can. So you won't really know a difference once something comes out. We won't like post something and then disappear. It'll be like, you'll get it every week. But we'll have already pre-recorded probably. But that's kind of, I don't know if that's interesting for people. I don't know. Maybe for some people. But I still
what else you got going on?
I was going to say, I feel like my instinct tells me doing a dinosaur rewatch podcast still tickles my balls.
Same. And we floated it to the group. We floated it to like the listeners and everyone seemed to be like on board to like at least give it a shot. So like, I think like that could be delightful,
Well, and then Shawn has an idea, which I think is brilliant, but my fear or worry is that it will be too niche. Is that like every single week we discuss a new backdoor pilot, which is basically when, we talked about this during the Nanny podcast, which was, or rather, Oh, Mr. Sheffield, which was when, for example, they had an episode all about this hair salon called the Chatterbox, and they were hoping to turn that into a Nanny spinoff with its own set of characters. And so a lot of shows, like over 200 shows have done that, from Happy Days to like Grey's Anatomy. And it's sort of like, well, would listeners want to potentially listen to something about a new show every single week? And I'm a little, I don't know, again, something, maybe it's just these dinosaurs is so silly that I love it. But okay, so yeah, maybe we'll do a little poll. What else is going on with me? I was going to tell you that
Tell me.
I had a song, because we did talk about theme songs. I had this song stuck in my head. I've had it for days and I've been singing it to myself, and I knew it was from a 90s movie, and I knew it was like, I could like feel like the vibe of what was happening. It was like, And I'm curious if you will have any idea. It's going to be so out of left field.
How does it go?
Okay, I don't remember the words, but it was like, and I did figure it out. Okay, but it goes.
Okay.
Say so good.
Oh, I don't know what that is. No, what is it?
Okay, finally it hit me. In the movie American Pie, every time the character is Oz, played by, who's that meathead looking dude? Oz, American Pie. I should have Googled this before.
Chris something.
Chris Klein. Chris Klein. Every time Chris Klein is on screen with his love interest, or they're having like a beat, or like he's running towards her, it'll go like, say da 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 da, and like finally
so
I was like, yes.
Is it a song or is it just like the
no? It's a song. It's like it's the song that they play to like indicate that like these two are falling in love, or like these two are having a moment.
That's fine. But they do it every time.
Yep.
Hey man, I liked American Pie.
Oh, me too. Oh my God.
Shit. That movie wrecked me as a kid. I saw that in college, and like I the only thing that I remember laughing harder at in a theater is the South Park movie, which I saw in the same year. I think those both came out like pretty close together, or like one was summer, one was fall. And like those two movies, I have like vivid memories. I know the theater. I can like literally remember like not knowing what to expect and like laughing my ass off.
It was so funny at the time it came out. Like, I'm sure we watch it now and we'd be like, uh-oh. But at the time, it was like, it was honestly one of the dirtiest things I'd ever seen. Like,
speaking of uh-oh and dirty, can I share you a weird fact I learned today? I listened to How Did This Get Made podcast. You know that podcast?
Oh, yeah. I love that. I love it.
So they did an episode on a movie called Doppelganger, which starred Drew Barrymore. And in the like setup and talking about the movie, Paul Scheer, one of the hosts, reveals that this movie was shot when she was 17. And then everyone goes like, ew, wait, what? She was naked in this movie. And he's like, oh yeah, big time. He's like, actually, the first time she was naked was in something called Interview Magazine, and she was 16. And they were like, what? And I was like, what? And then, he was like, yeah, and doing the research for this movie. And like, you know, he's like, our researcher put this packet together. And like,
I love how he's like, the research for the, I had to do research.
Because one of the co-hosts is his wife, June. And she immediately was like, Paul, why do you know that?
Yes.
Yeah. And he was like, the research. But yeah, man, I was like, whoa, I did not because I was alive for all of that for sure. I mean, she was also in this movie Poison Ivy that I saw as a kid where she was, you know, naked. And I was like, ooh, a naked movie on HBO.
I feel like this comes up a lot, especially like on podcasts, or I always say podcasts as if that's like real friends of ours, or I should say in conversations among people our age, where you'll be like, oh yeah, like, do you remember this thing that happened in movies or entertainment, or was even the joke in Jay Leno's monologue that we were all like, that's funny. And now we're like, oh my God. Like that was like, you know, there was something that someone brought up recently that like Leno said about Monica Lewinsky. And it's just like, he literally was like, what whore? And everyone was like, ha 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 ha, clap. Like, we were like, what a great joke. And you're just like, oh my God. Like, I'm so glad that like, I'm now different enough to be like, that's not okay. But yeah, like at the time we were all like, yeah, that's a great joke. Monica Lewinsky's a whore. Like,
yikes.
It's funny what. Yeah.
Or maybe totally.
Maybe he said slut, but still.
But you know, but the point is the same, right? Where it's just like I was like, I just couldn't even process that they let a 16-year-old girl in like a nationally distributed magazine be topless, and no one said anything, no one cared. She was emancipated, and that made her an adult, and end of discussion. Like, and then Paul was like, yeah, no, literally this movie, she turned 17 and they waited to shoot the shower scene until she was officially 17 so that it was legal to shoot it in whatever, in California or something. But like, it blew my mind. It made me so like, what were we
when
doing?
you hear that, it makes me be like, you know what? I know everyone loves to dunk on Drew now because she's so annoying in her TV show, in her like daytime show. But I'm like, God bless, good for her. Like
No,
she's happy.
she earned
She's
whatever
normal.
she gets to be whatever she is. That kid went through craziness as a child.
Yep.
So fine, good. I'm glad she seems happy. She seems, content, and like she just deserves that.
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? Let her just ride off into that sweet daytime sunset for the rest of her life. It seems, and kind of hug people a lot and cry tears of happiness.
Totally. Did you see our old boss was on the Drew Barrymore show recently?
Oh, I did see that. And he was, Brenda was on. I did see that.
Yeah. And he wandered out looking like he was homeless.
it was Macaulay Culkin. No, I thought he looked good. But, so I didn't see the beginning of it, but it kind of made, from what I saw, maybe Brenda was like, oh yeah, Mac is here. And then he kind of came out from backstage.
Yeah,
okay.
That's what I think happened too. That's all I saw. I just saw the clip and him telling the story about, but whatever. We don't have to get into it. Yeah, he's great. I love him. Hey, we love him, don't we, folks?
He's America's sweetheart. So also he's about Drew Barrymore's age, and they both hosted SNL very young.
Contemporaries.
Yes,
do we want to do rapid fire recommendations for things we've watched?
Oh, okay. Yeah. What have you been watching?
Okay. First of all, if you're not watching Severance, kill yourself.
Shawn, I literally, when I was like, I don't know why I started writing my list as soon as you said that, because I couldn't just keep it in my head. But the first thing was Severance. Yeah. Anyway, I was just curious what you thought.
Okay.
Are you watching White Lotus?
I love White Lotus. Yeah, that's Elizabeth's favorite right now is White Lotus. I think my only complaint with White Lotus is like, it's starting to feel formulaic to me in a way that like, I'm not surprised anymore. Like the first two seasons, they kind of kept me surprised. And now it's like, oh, right, a guy's going to die. Something bad's going to happen. Then we're going to meet a bunch of people. Potentially one of them or none of them is going to be responsible for the bad thing that happened. There's going to be 100 misdirects. And then we're going to like learn what happened.
Yeah, I think also something about the alchemy of these characters together. Like I'm totally watching it. I'm like enjoying it. I'm going to finish it. But like with the previous seasons, I was like, I can't wait to hop back into that world next week. Like, I can't wait to like, watch more. And I'm like, I don't really have that like compulsion this time. Something about just who the characters are. Also, Jennifer Coolidge has so much it factor. And I do feel like it's less entertaining without her. And I know I just said I didn't trust Kyle's instincts on Severance, but I do agree with him on this. He says that he feels like the characters this season are more like caricatures than previous seasons. He's like, in previous seasons, you'd like be like, I know that guy, or like, oh, like I know exactly that marriage that they have depicted. And this one, it's not like so far in the other direction, but it's like, oh, okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger's son is like a horny bro. Whereas the sort of similar characters to him in previous seasons were like somehow realer. Like, remember the husband of that brown-haired girl in the first season? He was like such a real douchebag.
Yes, he was like a guy you knew. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. The one thing that I think the one aspect that they actually are nailing that in is the relationship between the three women. I've seen a lot of online chatter, and I know even just from like talking to Elizabeth about it, like one or all or the relationship between the three of those women is incredibly relatable. Like multiple episodes, Elizabeth has been like, I relate to her, and it's always a different woman. And then also from like a larger macro level of like, oh my God, I've been in this like, every time one person is gone, the other two people are talking shit about them scenario. And it's so uncomfortable. So I think he's really nailing that. But I do agree. I think ultimately we're seeing much more caricature sketches rather than like, oh, right, I know this guy kind of thing,
I keep seeing these funny things online though, where people keep being like, when are those siblings gonna bang though?
Same. I mean, that was first episode. Elizabeth and I were like, ew, are they all having sex with each other? That's what it seemed like. First episode, it seemed like the younger brother was having sex with both the older brother and his sister, is what I thought.
The older brother definitely wanted to bang the sister.
Yes. Yes. I thought that was going to be like what the conflict in that family was.
Oh God. But yeah, it was going to get super dark. But I will say Parker Posey really makes me laugh.
Yeah, I will always watch anything with Parker Posey. She can do no wrong. Just
the way, like I actually think she, even though she seems over the top, I knew some women like her, like moms in DC who kind of had Southern backgrounds who were like so judgmental of anything that wasn't like a very, very specific way to live, and literally like, well, I just don't know if I trust their values.
Yeah, totally.
Like, you're such
people
an
like
asshole.
That in Florida growing up, like literally people that had Southern accents.
Yes. And like very much sort of, she's like, well, you know, all actresses are prostitutes. It's just like, yeah. But okay. I think that's basically all. I'm watching a really sad British show.
My last suggestion is, if you didn't see Anora yet, I really liked Anora, and Elizabeth cannot stop talking about it. Like literally for like weeks now, she's been talking about the ending of Anora and what it means to her and what it could mean. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
There. All right.
It was great. We've been going for 2 hours. I was going to say I'm not going to recommend it, but it's a show about the Pan Am flight that crashed in Britain like 30 years ago with Colin Firth. And I don't even like watching it, but it'll be on in my house. And when it's on, I'm like literally like a tear is rolling down my cheek. And I'm like, everyone in this is so good. And then I like walk away and do my own thing.
Okay, well, I can't wait to hear what you think. You got to text me, let me know what you think of Paradise, because you're gonna be like, just text me when you get to the end of that first episode. You're either in or you're out, on what the show is gonna be about.
Okay.
Okay. How do we get out of this? Okay. Let's see. How do I?
Well, everybody, we're going to post this, you're going to see it wherever it's posted, on wherever you can get your podcast. We'll post on Instagram about it. So please write in. We'd love to hear from you. We're at Mr. Chef. What are we? Mr. Chef Pod on Instagram. What's our email again? I can never remember.
It's Mr. Sheffield Podcast.
Okay. So it's
full
different.
Thing, Mr. Sheffield Podcast. And then everywhere else, we're Mr. Chef Pod.
Yes. Yeah. So if you want to email us, Mr. Sheffield Podcast at Gmail. And then, just chime in on Instagram as usual. Would you guys listen to a show devoted to dinosaurs, maybe called, what is it? What do we want to say? Not the Mama? Is that what we're thinking about? Not the Mama. Or something where like every week we're talking about a different episode of a classic show where the episode is all about trying to launch a new show, like a backdoor pilot. I'd probably call it something like The Backdoor with Shawn and Toria.
Yeah, in the backdoor with Shawn and Toria. And like in my brain, like the dinosaur show is more like what we did with Mr. Chef Pod, and the backdoor pilot show is more like, obviously, like there's going to be shows that people aren't familiar with. So like you're going to get like a little bit of quick history and like background. And then we'll like talk about whether or not this particular backdoor pilot in trying to spin off to a new show is successful in and of itself, right? Which theoretically, a successful backdoor pilot, anyone should be able to tune into that episode of that show, see it, and then be like, ooh, I want to follow those guys now, right? That's like, I think, our base metric. And then sort of like get into, like we always do, of like the mechanics of the writing of all of these things and stuff. So I don't know. Let us know. Let us know in the feedback, in the comments. Obviously, I think now you can like comment on Spotify. There's like the whole podcasting world changed while we were away, Toria. It's moving on without us. We have to get back, or we're going to be left in the dust.
Dogs are eating cats. Cats are eating dogs. Yep. Is that how it goes?
No, it's dogs and cats living together.
Oh, yeah, right.
Ghostbusters.
It's not cats are eating dogs now.
No.
All right, everybody. With that, goodbye.
The Flushing girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.